I had seen her name 100 times before I ever saw her face, and I would have told you that first winter that I did not care to see either. Seraphine, the songbird of the saffron rim. It was painted on handbills nailed to every post from Halden Crossing clear down to the river towns, gold letters on red paper, a drawing of a woman with her chin lifted and her mouth open like she was about to swallow the whole sky. Men I had known 30 years went soft in the face when they spoke of her. They said she could make a grown drover cry into his hat. They said her voice was worth more than a herd. I said I had a string of green horses to break before the snow closed the passes, and I rode home to my empty house and thought no more about it. That was the kind of man I was then. I had buried my wife 6 years gone, and a piece of me she took down into the ground with her, and I had decided the world could keep its songs. So when the wind came down off the saffron rim that November like it meant to scrape the hide off the land, I was not thinking of any singer. I was thinking of my horses. I had run the Two Forks alone since Sarah died, me and an old hand named Pelham who was more family than help, and a man who runs a horse ranch alone watches the sky the way other men watch a card table. The clouds had been stacking up gray and mean over the rim all afternoon, and the first hard snow of the year was coming, the kind that buries the trail and kills the careless. I had the mares in, the wood stacked, the lamps trimmed. I figured to wait it out warm and let the storm have the country to itself. Then I heard the dogs. They were down at the road, the two of them, barking the way they barked at strangers, and under the wind I caught it, a sound that did not belong to the storm. Wheels. A team in trouble. The crack of a whip and a man's voice cursing, high and frightened, the way a town man's voice goes when the land turns on him and he does not know what to do about it. I pulled on my coat and went out into a wall of white. The road below my place runs along the Calico River and then climbs toward the pass, and that is where I found them. 3 wagons, painted up gaudy as the handbills, gold and red gone gray under the driving snow. The lead wagon had thrown a wheel clean off in the rocks at the ford, and it sat canted over in the river shallows with the team screaming and tangled in the traces, and ice already forming on their legs. A heavy-set man in a city coat stood on the bank waving his arms and shouting orders that nobody could hear and nobody could follow. 2 other men, performers by the look of their thin coats, were trying to cut the team loose and getting kicked for their trouble. And standing apart from all of it, up on the high seat of the second wagon with a wool blanket pulled around her and the snow already whitening her hair, was a woman who did not shout and did not wave and did not move at all. She just watched the river take her wagon, with a stillness that I have come to know means a person has stopped expecting to be helped. I did not know yet that she was the Songbird. I did not know anything except that the team was about to drown and the night was about to kill all of them. So I did what a man does. I got my rope on the strongest of the team, and I put my own weight and my horses against the cold and the current, and between us, me hauling, those 2 thin performers pushing, we got the animals cut free and dragged up onto the bank, blowing and shaking. The wagon we left to the river. There was no saving it. The heavy-set man came at me through the snow with his hand out and a smile cut into his face like it had been put there with a knife. "Sir," he said, "you have my eternal gratitude. You have no idea who you have rescued this night. Allow me to present," and he turned and swept his arm toward the woman on the seat as if he were unveiling a statue. Seraphine, the songbird of the saffron rim, the most celebrated voice west of the Missouri. I looked at the woman. The snow was on her lashes and her lips had gone the color of the river ice, and she was shaking so hard I could hear her teeth, and she was not looking at the man, or at me, or at her own ruined wagon. She was looking at the team I had just pulled out of the water, the way you look at something you are glad is safe when nobody is glad you are. "She can be celebrated by my fire," I said, "or she can freeze to death being celebrated out here. Get her down." That is how the Songbird came to the Two Forks. I had no notion of keeping her. My plan, such as it was, ran no further than the storm. I had a bunkhouse, cold and shut up, and the main house, and an old foreman who snored, and a barn full of horses, and I meant to put the whole shivering troop under whatever roof they would fit and feed them what I had until the pass opened, and they could go on to wherever celebrated people went. I did not expect the storm to last 9 days. I did not expect, when it broke, that the pass would be packed to the saddle horns and the river bottom flooded and impassable, and that the whole gaudy traveling lot of them would be marooned at my ranch until the country thawed enough to let them out. And I most surely did not expect the woman. Her name was not Seraphine. I learned that the second night. I had given the main house over to her and the heavy-set man. His name was Cyrus Thorne, and he called himself her manager, her impresario, her discoverer, a great many things, most of them about himself, and I had taken the bunkhouse with the others. But the second night I came up to the house to bring more wood, and I found her alone in the front room by the fire, and Thorne snoring in the back, and she was sitting very straight on the edge of the chair with her hands folded like a woman in church, and she was crying. Not loud. I would never have known but for the firelight on her face. She wiped it away quick when she saw me and stood up like she had been caught at something. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll go to bed. This is your house. I'm sorry." "It's not my house tonight," I said. "It's yours till the snow lets you out. Sit down." She sat. I built up the fire. I am not a talking man, and I did not try to make her talk, and maybe that is what loosened her tongue, because after a while she said to the fire and not to me, "My name is Etta, just Etta. Seraphine is a thing Mr. Thorne made up." She said it the way you'd confess a small theft. "I'd be obliged if you didn't tell the others. He doesn't like it said." "Etta," I said, "I'm Wade Carrick, and I don't tell the others much of anything." She smiled at that, a real one, quick and gone. It changed her whole face. The woman on the handbills had a face for 1,000 people. This one had a face for one. And I am a fool, but I will tell you the truth as I have told it to no one. Something turned over in my chest in that moment that had been still as a stone for 6 years, and it frightened me worse than the river had. I want to be plain about the kind of trouble she was in, because it took me a good while to see it, and I have learned that the worst cages are the ones with the door painted on the outside, so it looks like a window. Cyrus Thorne had found Etta when she was a girl of 15, orphaned and singing for coins in a railhead town, and he had told her and told everyone after that he had saved her from the gutter, that he had fed and clothed and trained her, that everything she had she owed to him. By the time I met her she was a woman grown, near 30 by my guess, and she had been singing under his hand for half her life. He took the door money. He took the subscriptions. He paid the troop their wages, and he gave her what he called her allowance, which was pennies, and he kept a ledger that he said showed how deep she stood in debt to him for her training, her gowns, her keep, the wagons, the years. Every season the debt grew. She had asked him once. She told me later what the sum was, and he had laughed and said she would never sing it off, not if she lived to be 100, and that she ought to be grateful he kept her at all. A woman alone, he reminded her, was worth nothing in this country. A woman who belonged to the great Cyrus Thorne was worth a fortune. He never let her hold the fortune. He just let her stand near it and sing. I did not learn all of that the second night. I learned it in pieces over those 9 Snowden days and the weeks that followed, the way you learn the shape of a thing in the dark by touching it a little at a time. But I learned the heart of it fast enough, because Thorne could not help showing it. He was the kind of man who owned things out loud. "She's a delicate instrument, Carrick," he told me the third morning, over my own coffee, in my own kitchen, with the air of a man explaining a fine watch to a clod. "She doesn't lift, she doesn't carry, she doesn't soil her hands. Her hands are worth more than your whole spread. I've spent a fortune protecting that voice, and I intend to recover every cent of it. So I'd thank you to keep your hired men away from her and your barnyard chores well clear. She rests. She does nothing but rest until I can get her to Cheyenne, where she is expected, and where she will sing, and where I will be repaid for this catastrophe." He looked out my window at the wreck of the road and the white burying everything, and he said, like it was my fault, "This country is a thief." I looked at his soft hands around my cup, and I thought several things I did not say. What I said was, Out here a person who does nothing tends to go soft in the head. She's welcome to do as she likes. He did not understand me, which suited me fine. But Etta understood. Because the next day, when Thorne slept late the way town men do, I went out to break ice on the troughs and feed the mares, and I came around the corner of the barn and found her there in the cold in a borrowed coat of Sarah's that Pelham must have dug out, standing at the rail of the round pen watching a young dun filly I had been gentling all fall. The filly was a wary little thing, abused before I bought her, quick to flinch, and she stood across the pen with her ears flat and her eyes white-trimmed, trusting nobody. Etta was not trying to touch her. She was just standing very still at the rail with her hand out flat and low, the way you do, and I stopped when I heard it, she was singing to her. Not the big sound, not Seraphine. Low, almost under her breath. A little tune with no words I could catch, the kind a body might hum over a cradle. The filly had her neck stretched halfway across the pen toward that sound. Etta saw me and went red and dropped her hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "Mr. Thorne says I'm not to." "That filly's been here 2 months," I said, "and she hasn't let me get within 10 feet of her without a fight. You've had her halfway to eating out of your hand in 5 minutes. I came and leaned on the rail beside her, not too close. "Mr. Thorne isn't here, and he doesn't run my barn. You sing to my horses all you want, Etta. They've got better ears than the crowds in Cheyenne anyhow." She laughed the real laugh again, and the filly's ears came up at it. And for a moment the three of us stood there in the cold with the steam rising off the troughs, and I thought, this is the realest thing this woman has done in years, and nobody is paying for it, and nobody is watching but me and a half-broke horse. After that she came out to the barn every morning. I have to tell it slow here because the slow part is the true part, and if I rush it you will not believe what came after. Those Snowdon days were the strangest of my life, and the sweetest, and I did not know it while they were happening. You never do. Thorne kept to the house and his ledgers and his complaints. The 2 performers, a juggler named Foss and a fiddler named Quirk, and an old woman named Mrs. Dale who sewed the gowns, made themselves useful in the bunkhouse and were glad enough of warm beds and full plates. And Etta came to the barn. She was no good at chores at first. She did not know which end of a pitchfork to take hold of, but she learned, and she wanted to, which is more than I can say for half the men I have hired. She learned to throw down hay and to break the ice and to keep clear of the kicking ones. Her hands, the precious hands Thorne would not let touch the world, came up in blisters and then in calluses, and she looked at them like they were a wonder. She told me she had not been allowed to do a useful thing with her hands since she was a girl. She said it cost her nothing to sing, that singing came as easy as breathing and always had, and that maybe that was the whole trouble, that a thing that costs you nothing to give, the world will take from you forever and call you ungrateful when you tire. But shoveling stalls, she said, that cost her something and she got something for it. The stall clean, the horse fed, and nobody owned the doing of it but her. "You sound like a woman who spent her whole life being owned," I said. I did not mean to say it. It came out. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I've been the most famous woman in 3 territories since I was 19, Mr. Carrick. There are men who would weep to touch my hand, and I have never once in my life slept under a roof that was mine or kept a dollar I earned or said no to anything and had it stick." She looked out at the snow. "Everybody's heard Seraphine. Nobody's ever met Etta. There's no money in Etta." "There's a horse out there in love with Etta," I said, "and I never could stand Seraphine." That made her cry and laugh at the same time, which I have since learned is the best thing a man can make a woman do, and the hardest. In the evenings, when Thorne had gone to his bed, she sang. Not for me, I want that understood, she did not perform. She would be at the dishes, or mending tack by the fire because she had taken that up too, and she would just start low, the way she'd sung to the filly. Old songs. River songs and church songs, and a few I had not heard since my mother sang them in a sod house when I was a boy I could barely remember. And I would sit in the dark across the room with my pipe gone cold in my hand, and I would think, Every town from here to the Missouri has paid silver to hear this, and they have never once heard it, because what they paid for was Seraphine up on a stage, lit by lamps, performing them their wonder. What I got, for nothing, for the price of a wood fire and an old coat and leaving a woman be, was a person singing because she was content. I would not have traded it for the whole take of every theater she ever filled. The stone in my chest was gone. I knew it and I was afraid of it. I had loved my Sarah and lost her, and I had told myself, never again, the cost is too dear. And here it had come anyway, unbidden, in the worst possible woman to give a heart to, a woman the whole world wanted, a woman who would be gone the moment the past cleared, a woman owned in all but name by a man with a ledger. I told myself I was a fool. I told myself she was only kind to me because I was kind to her and there was nobody else, and that the minute the lamps and the silver and the celebration came back, she would forget the two forks like a bad night's dream. I told myself a great many sensible things. On the 7th night she came and sat by me at the fire, and she did not sing. She said, "Wade, can I ask you something and you tell me true?" "I don't know another way to tell a thing," I said. "When you look at me," she said, and her voice was not the singer's voice now, it was just a woman's, low and unsure, "do you see her, Seraphine, the handbills, or do you see me?" I am not a man with pretty words. I have spent my life among horses and weather and silence. But I had been turning that question over for 6 nights, and so when she asked it, the answer came out whole. "Etta," I said, "I didn't know you were famous till that fool Thorne told me. I'd already pulled your team out of the river by then. I have never in my life heard you sing on a stage, and I hope I never do, because the stage isn't where the singing is. The singing's in the barn to a scared filly when you don't know I'm there. I don't see Seraphine. I wouldn't cross the road to see Seraphine. I'd cross this whole country in a blizzard for Etta and never count it a hardship." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached over and took my hand, the rough one, the one that had hauled the rope, and she held it in both of hers, her own grown rough now too, and she did not say anything at all, and she did not need to. That is as far as I will take that part. We were neither of us young, and we had both been hurt enough to be careful, and there was a man asleep in the back room who thought he owned her. But I will say that something was settled between us by that fire, quiet and certain, and that for the first time since I had stood at Sarah's grave, I went to my cold bunk that night with my chest full instead of hollow, and I lay awake not from grief, but from a kind of terror that is very close to joy. Then the snow stopped, and the world came back, and with it came the trouble. The pass would not be open for a month yet. That much country does not thaw in a day, but the storm broke clear and cold, and the river dropped, and Thorne smelled freedom and money the way a buzzard smells what it smells. He came alive. He counted the days to Cheyenne. He drew up new bills. He cornered Foss and Quirk and Mrs. Dale and harangued them about the engagements they were missing, the fortune the snow had cost him, as if the weather had picked his pocket personal. And he noticed, because men like him always notice, that Etta had changed. She did not flinch when he raised his voice any more. She had taken to holding her chin a certain way. She had calluses on her hands and color in her face, and she had been heard, more than once, laughing out in the barn. And one morning Thorne stood in my kitchen window and watched her come up from the round pen with her hair loose and Sarah's old coat on, and that dun filly, that wary, beaten, untouchable filly, following her along the inside of the fence with its nose at her shoulder like a dog, and he turned to me with the smile cut into his face, and he said, "I see you've made yourself useful to my property, Carrick." I set down my coffee, very careful. "You'll want to mind that word," I said. "Oh, I mean her no insult." He waved a soft hand. "I'm fond of her. I'm fonder of her than anyone living. But fondness is a luxury, and I am a businessman. That woman owes me $11,000, Carrick, 11,000 for 15 years of training and keeping gowns and travel, and I have the books to prove it. She will sing it off or she will sing till she drops, and either way she will sing it off to me, because there is no one else in this world who would take her on." "You think a rancher's kindness has changed that?" He laughed. "She's a voice on 2 legs. She's the best property I ever owned, and I do not intend to lose her to the first lonely cowman who's nice to her in a snowstorm. When the pass opens, she comes to Cheyenne. That's the end of it. I had been a peaceable man for a long time. I had buried my temper with my wife. But I felt it move in me then, old and slow and dangerous, and I had to put both my hands flat on the table to keep from doing a thing I would regret. "She's not property," I said. "There's no such thing as property that's a person, not in this country, not anywhere." "There's debt," Thorne said pleasantly, "and debt is the law, and the law, Mr. Carrick, is on my side of the ledger." He picked up his hat. "I'll thank you to remember that when the marshal asks." I did not answer him. I went out to the barn and I stood with my forehead against the dun filly's neck for a long while until my hands quit shaking, and the filly let me, which she never had before, and I understood that Etta had gentled the both of us. I will tell you now the thing I did, because it is the spine of all that came after, and I am not ashamed of it, and I want it set down right. I did not buy her freedom. I want that plain. There are men in this country who would have, and called it kindness, paid Thorne his 11,000 or whatever he'd settle for and carried her off, and she'd have gone from being his to being mine, and that is not freedom. That is only a change of owner, and a person is not a debt to be assumed. I had thought about it in the night. I had the money, not 11,000, but I had the ranch, and a man can borrow against a ranch. And I had lain there and seen myself doing it and seen her face when I told her, grateful and small, and I had known in my bones it was wrong. If she came to me, it would be because she chose to, free and clear, owing me nothing, or it would mean nothing at all. So instead I did a slower, harder thing. I asked questions. I had pulled a man's whole life out of a river. I had a right to know what I'd fished up. And there is a thing about traveling shows that townspeople forget. The people in them know everything. Foss the juggler had been with Thorne 9 years and hated him the way only a long-suffering man can hate. Old Mrs. Dale had sewed the gowns for 2 decades and kept, in a tin box, every receipt and every notice and a memory like a courthouse. Quirk had once, before he was a fiddler, kept books for a freight company. And all 3 of them, snowed in on my ranch, fed at my table, far from Thorne's ear, were a great deal more willing to talk than they had ever been before. What they told me and what Mrs. Dale's tin box proved was this. The $11,000 was a lie. There was a ledger all right, and it showed Etta deep in debt, but it was a ledger Thorne kept for show, and it had nothing in it that a court would honor. He had paid for her training, yes, a little 15 years gone, and her keep such as it was. But against that he had collected, by Quirk's careful figuring on the back of an old handbill, by the door receipts and the subscription lists Mrs. Dale had hoarded out of long habit, something north of $40,000 over the years, Etta's earnings, her crowds, her voice, of which he had paid her, all told, a few hundred. The debt did not run from Etta to Thorne. It ran 10 times over from Thorne to Etta. He had been robbing her in plain sight her whole life, and calling it her good fortune. And there was more. There was no contract. Mrs. Dale was certain of it, and Foss confirmed it. Thorne had never put a thing in writing, because a thing in writing can be taken to a judge by either party, and Thorne wanted only the side of it that lived in Etta's fear. She had believed she was bound because he had told her she was bound, every day, for 15 years, since she was a frightened girl of 15, and a thing told to a child often enough becomes truer to them than the sky. But there were no chains on her but the ones he'd talked into her. There never had been. I sat in the bunkhouse that night with that old handbill covered in Quirk's figures, and I felt something I had not felt in years, which was hope, and right behind it something a great deal hotter which I will not dress up. I wanted to take Cyrus Thorne apart. But I had learned long ago that a hot man loses, and that the surest way to ruin a true thing is to do it in anger and in haste. So I banked it. And I made a plan that was slower and colder, and in the end, 100 times worse for Thorne than any beating. I did not tell Etta yet. That was the hardest part, and maybe I was wrong to wait, but I judged that to give her hope and then have it fail would break something in her that might not mend, and I would not risk her on a maybe. I waited until I was sure. It took 3 weeks for the past to soften. In those 3 weeks I rode to Halden Crossing twice on hard ground alone, and I will tell you who I saw, because it took a town to do this and I want the town remembered. I saw Judge Amos Renner, who had married me and Sarah and buried her, and who knew the law of this territory better than any man and despised a cheat. I saw End Holloway, who ran the bank, and who took one look at Quirk's figures and Mrs. Dale's receipts and got a glint in his eye. I saw the editor of the Crossing's little newspaper, a thin, sharp fellow named Prunt who had run Thorne's advertisements for the show all season and was sour to learn he'd been printing for a thief. And I saw a dozen ordinary souls, the storekeep, the smith, the women of the church society, who, when the snow finally let the road open, would be the first to fill whatever hall the Songbird sang in, and who did not take kindly, once the story got round, to learning what was done to her. I laid it all out for Judge Renner across his stove. He listened without a word, the way good judges do, and when I was done he sat back and said, "Wade, there's no debt here a court would touch. There's no contract. By the books your fiddler's drawn, the man owes her more than she'll ever spend. If she comes before me and says she's done, and if he lays a hand on her to stop her, he'll answer for it. The only thing holding that woman is that she doesn't know she's free." He looked at me a long moment. "You aiming to tell her?" "I aim," I said, "for the whole territory to tell her, all at once, where he can't talk it back into a lie." The judge smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had waited a long time to see the right thing done to the right scoundrel. "Then I'll be there," he said. "Here is how it fell out, and I have gone over it 1,000 times in the years since, and I would not change a hair of it. The pass opened on a bright cold morning in the first week of the new year. Thorne was up at dawn, all bustle and triumph, ordering the wagons made ready, counting the miles to Cheyenne. He had decided, I had let him decide, had even encouraged it, that before they left, the great Seraphine would sing one night in Halden Crossing, a benefit, he called it, to recoup a sliver of his catastrophic losses, the famous Songbird gracing the little town that had been her unwilling host. He had the bills printed at Pruitt's press. He had no notion that half the town had spent 3 weeks learning exactly what he was. He thought he was using us. We let him think it. The hall in Halden Crossing was the church, with the pews and a platform at the front. And on that night it was packed to the doors and out into the cold street. Every soul for 20 miles had come, more than had ever come for any show, and Thorne stood at the back swelling like a toad, counting heads and silver. He did not notice that the front pew held Judge Renner and End Holloway from the bank and Pruitt with his notebook. He did not notice the temper in the room under the murmur. He noticed only that his property was about to sing, and that he was about to be rich, and he was happy. Etta came out in the red and gold gown Mrs. Dale had sewed, and the room went still, and she sang. I had told her nothing. I had only told her that morning, holding both her hands by the round pen with the filly's breath fogging between us, that whatever happened that night, she should trust me, and that she was safer than she knew, and that I loved her the first time I said it, and that nothing in the world could make me take a thing from her she did not freely give. She had looked at me hard and frightened, and then she had nodded, because she did trust me, God knows why, and she had gone to sing not knowing it would be the last time she ever sang a note that another man got paid for. She sang 3 songs. I could not tell you what they were. I was watching the crowd and watching Thorne and watching her, and my heart was going like a green horse. And when the 3rd song ended and the room shook with the noise of it, before Thorne could come forward to take his bows on her account, Judge Amos Renner stood up from the front pew. He was a big old man with a voice that had filled courtrooms for 40 years, and he used it. "Before the lady sings again," the judge said, and the room hushed for him the way it would not have hushed for Thorne, "this town has a matter of business it would like settled. Miss, and I'll use your right name, ma'am, for it's a good one and you've a right to it, Miss Etta." He turned to her where she stood frozen on the platform. There is a man here who has told you for 15 years that you belong to him, that you owe him a debt of $11,000, that no one would have you, and that you must sing for him till you die." A murmur ran the room, ugly, and Thorne's face began to change. Mr. Holloway of the bank and Mr. Quirk and Mrs. Dale have between them drawn up the true account from this man's own door receipts and subscription lists, kept these many years. He held up the papers. "And the true account, ma'am, is that you do not owe Cyrus Thorne 1 red cent. The account is that he owes you better than $30,000 in earnings he has taken and never paid. And as for the contract that binds you, there is none. There never was. You have been free every day of your life, Miss Etta. You have only been told that you weren't. I have seen a great many things in my years. I saw the war, far off and bad. I have seen floods take whole valleys and fire take a town. But I have never seen anything to equal the thing that happened on Etta's face in that church when an old judge told her, in front of 500 witnesses, that the door of her cage had been standing open her whole life. She did not faint or weep, not then. She went very still, that stillness I had seen on the wagon seat in the snow, but turned inside out, the stillness of a person who has stopped expecting and is, in one instant, made to expect again. And then she looked, not at the judge, not at the papers, not at the roaring crowd. She looked at me at the back of the hall by the door, and I nodded. And she understood that I had done this, and that I had not told her so it could not be a thing she owed me either, and that the only thing I had ever wanted from her was for her to be free to choose, even if she chose to go. Cyrus Thorne tried to talk. Of course he did. He came up the aisle red and shouting about the law and his rights and the ingratitude of the woman he'd raised from nothing, and the slander and the lawsuit he'd bring, and for half a minute the old fear flickered across Etta's face, because his voice was the voice that had run her life. But the judge let him rant himself out, and then said, very quiet, that the only lawsuit going forward in this territory would be Miss Etta's, for the $30,000 and more, and that end Holloway had already wired Cheyenne about the man's accounts, and that if Mr. Thorne wished to avoid a courtroom and a cell, he might consider how quickly a man could get to the territory line if he started now. And the room, 500 people who had loved Seraphine and were learning to be furious on behalf of Etta, rose to its feet, and they did not lay a hand on him, but they did not need to. He looked at all those faces and he understood, finally, that the country he'd called a thief had taken from him the one thing he'd ever truly stolen, and he ran. I am told he made the line in 2 days. I never saw him again, nor did she, and the world was the cleaner for it. When he was gone, the hall was very quiet, and then it was not quiet at all, and through all the noise Etta came down off the platform and down the long aisle in her red and gold gown, past all those reaching, weeping, cheering people who had paid silver for 15 years to own a piece of her voice, and she walked the whole length of them and did not stop, and she came to the back of the hall to me, and she put her rough hands, a barn woman's hands now, under the gown flat against my chest, and she said, so only I could hear it under the roar, "You didn't pay him." "No," I said. "You could have. You could have bought me free, and I'd have gone with you grateful and never known the difference." "I'd have known the difference," I said. "And you're not a thing to be bought, Etta, not by him, not by me. I wanted you free. Whatever you do with free is yours." She was crying now, finally, the way a person cries when a thing too big has happened. "Then I'll tell you what I'll do with it," she said, "because it's mine to say, isn't it? For the first time in my life it's mine to say." She took a breath. "I am done singing for crowds, Wade Carrick. I'll never stand on another stage. There's nothing up there I want." She looked up at me, and the whole woman was in her face. Etta and no one else, no handbill, no Seraphine, just the person who sang to scared horses in the cold because it cost her something and she got to keep what it bought. But there's a barn out at the Two Forks with a filly in it that's half in love with me, and a man holding the door that I'm all the way in love with, and if he'll have me not owning, not owing, just having and held, I'd like to go home. I did not have any pretty words. I never did. I just took her 2 rough hands off my chest and held them in my 2 rough hands, and I said, "It's not my house anymore, Etta. Hasn't been since the night you cried by that fire. It's yours. Come home." The whole church heard the last of it, and the roof near came off with the sound they made, but I did not hear them. I was looking at her. We were married by Judge Renner that spring, by the round pen, with Pelham and the filly and Foss and Quirk and old Mrs. Dale, who stayed on, and sewed Etta a wedding dress with no gold on it anywhere and half of Haldon crossing in the yard. She wore the calluses on her hands like rings. She got her money in the end. The territory was thorough with Thorne's accounts, and a good piece of what he'd stolen came back to her, and she put every dollar of it into the 2 Forks, into good stock and new fence and a proper roof, and she said it pleased her more than any door receipt ever had, because she had earned it twice, once with her voice and once by being free of the man who took it. She never did sing for crowds again, but I want you to understand that the singing did not stop. Lord, no. The 2 Forks rang with it. She sang to the horses every morning and gentled the meanest of them with it, until folks came from 3 counties to buy a Carrick horse because they knew it would have a soft mouth and a steady head, gentled by the famous Songbird who had quit the stage to break colts on the Calico. She sang at church when she had a mind to, and at every wedding and every burying in the valley free, for the love of it, and people drove all day to hear her do it. And in the evenings, by our own fire in our own house, she sang to me the low songs, the river songs, the cradle songs, and in time the songs to a child of our own and then another. And I would sit there with my pipe gone cold, the same as that first winter, and I would think the same thought I had thought then, only now it had no ache in it, only wonder. Every town from here to the Missouri paid silver to hear this woman, and they never once heard her. They heard Seraphine up on a stage, lit and performing and owned. And I, a hard old widower who could not have told you a thing about music, who would not have crossed the road to see a celebrated woman, who only went out one night to keep a team from drowning, I got the singing. The real singing. The kind that costs the singer something and is given anyway, for nothing, for love, because the giver is free to keep it or give it as she pleases and has chosen, every single day for all the long good years of our life, to give it to me. That is the whole of it, and it is true. The most famous voice in the territory came down off the stage and walked the length of a crowded hall and out the door, past everyone who wanted to own a piece of her, and she came to the one man in the country who had never wanted anything from her but for her to be free. And then we went home,